She's a good bitch.
The first episode of this third cycle begins with a revelation that will leave you breathless. 5 years have passed since Rue received her diploma. Today, she is a woman facing the conflicts inherent to adulthood. However, what is truly shocking is her geographical location. She is in Mexican territory, specifically in the city of Chihuahua, a destination she reached driven by her turbulent bond with illicit substances. On that particular afternoon, Rue found herself in the middle of a desert wasteland. Inside the vehicle's cabin, the atmosphere was heavy with good music and the presence of a suspicious-looking suitcase resting in the back. After driving for several hours at breakneck speeds through the dunes, Rue finally reached the border wall structure. At that point, she shelled out nearly $1,000 to access an unusual and extremely dangerous system to cross to the American side using 4 steel beams. However, a critical mishap occurred. She lacked the necessary momentum, and the truck ended up perfectly stuck at the top of the wall. The only way to escape that situation was by getting the vehicle to balance with surgical precision. To achieve this, she had to move the suitcase to the front seat and exit the unit to give it one final push. Nonetheless, just when success seemed assured, fate had a new complication in store. During a few seconds fraught with terror, Rue seriously considered abandoning the truck and climbing down on her own, even knowing she ran the imminent risk of being crushed by the vehicle during the descent. After a nerve-wracking wait, the scene shifts, and we see her finally arriving in Agua Dulce, Texas. She carries only the suitcase on her shoulders, showcasing an unbreakable will as she treks through the unforgiving desert until reaching a family home on the outskirts. On that specific morning, the family's youngest daughter discovers her resting in the barn and, with touching innocence, offers her some milk. Rue, exhausted after walking relentlessly throughout the night, accepts that act of kindness with immense gratitude. Minutes later, the family members, who are devout believers, formally invite Rue to share the breakfast table. During the morning prayer, the father raises a plea to the Lord, begging him to guide her along the path of righteousness and to cleanse any demons she might have picked up in the solitude of the border. After enjoying a Christian breakfast with authentic Southern flavor, the eldest daughter offers to drive her into the city. During the journey, Daisy curiously questions her about what life is like for a city girl, confessing that her father doesn't even allow them internet access and that she envisions Rue's life as something incredibly exciting. Rue honestly admits she would give everything she owns to have a peaceful life like theirs. After that confession, silence takes over the car until they finally arrive at the bus station. There begins Rue's long and grueling journey back home. After spending nearly 2 days confined in public transportation alongside others who also crossed the border, Rue finally arrives in California. Upon arrival, she heads to the residence of a woman who, wasting no time, asks about the whereabouts of the vehicle. When Rue recounts the incident at the wall, the woman replies with a cutting coldness that the value of the truck will be charged directly to her personal account. The house is strangely populated by birds that seem to know her name. And after a few high-tension minutes, Rue begins to tell us what her life has been like in the recent past. At that precise moment, the narrative takes us back 1 year so we can understand how she ended up distributing substances for this mysterious woman. It turns out that at the time she was working in a small tobacco shack, serving addicts and suffering violent robberies at least twice a month. One afternoon, Lori made her appearance. She showed up to confront her for having run away from home after receiving her trust. Looking back, Rue notices a young armed man watching her every move in case she tries to flee. Lori calmly explains that her initial debt of $10,000, with 20% interest over 46 months, has mathematically escalated to the absurd figure of $887,000. Facing such a landscape, she proposes they must quickly find a solution to this small financial dilemma. Recognizing it is an unreachable sum, Lori decides in a calculated move to round the debt down to $100,000. Immediately after, she presents her with a brutal choice: work in the world of prostitution or serve as a drug mule. Barely 2 days later, Rue was already in Mexico, operating as Lori's direct contact with local criminal organizations. After spending an entire hour performing that repulsive task, Rue made a decision for her next delivery. She would bring a partner to split the load between the two of them. If there is anything riskier than swallowing pure fentanyl protected by condoms, It is for one of the pieces to break and your partner to drop dead in the middle of a train station, which would increase your debt after losing nearly a kilogram of product. But before Faye ended up in the morgue, the story shows us in detail what happened. Both left the establishment in unison, boarded a car, and were required to cross customs before 3 in the afternoon. It was a mission where the clock was their main enemy, and they had to act with haste. After driving for a couple of hours, the young women finally found themselves in the line of cars to cross the border. At that moment, Faye began to experience pressure in her intestines that became unbearable. Rue, seized by terror, pleaded with her to resist as long as she could, reminding her that their lives were at stake. If a single balloon left her body, the canines would detect them in a second. To make matters worse, the agent in the booth proved to be especially meticulous and decided to prolong the inspection. He requested a dog to sweep the car, transforming the seconds Faye had to hold the merchandise into true physical and mental torture. The girls have everything against them. They look exactly like what they are, 2 junkies, and they are sweating profusely due to the environmental pressure. Upon arriving at Laurie's hideout that same night, Faye could no longer contain the pressure. She arrived stained with excrement, unable to hold the product, though fortunately they managed to deliver the shipment safe and sound. For her part, Rue is in such a precarious condition that she cannot fend for herself, so one of the hitmen has to carry her to the bathtub. There, they force her to defecate into a pasta strainer to rescue the balloons one by one. That same utensil is used by Faye an hour later to cook dinner for her strange new family. Since Fezco's house appeared on the news and the police siege grew in the sector, she had to move there and join her brother Harvey. Despite working as mules for a group obsessed with guns, Rue has managed to complete 12 trips to Mexico to move merchandise without her strategy failing so far. Tonight, Faye confesses that she has feelings for Wayne, who has been saving money to flee. Furthermore, Wayne revealed to her that there is a safe in the basement full of cash, a detail that immediately awakens Rue's ambition. Rue begins working as an Uber driver, moving all sorts of eccentric subjects around the city as long as they have the means to pay. Days later, Rue visits Lexi, who is very happy to see her. Lexi wants to know every detail of her supposed stay in Arizona and her university studies. However, it is obvious that it is all a sham. Rue hasn't touched a book in all this time, but she wears her university sweatshirt so her friend continues to believe the lie. Rue tells her about the Christians she met in Texas. She hasn't been able to get them out of her mind since then. She says they were the happiest people in the world, despite living without technology. Then, Rue asks about Fez, as it's been a long time since she contacted him. Faced with the question, Lexi invents several excuses to evade the subject, reminding her that her work in Hollywood has her very absorbed. Currently, she is the right hand of Patty Lance, a mythical figure in the industry, and she feels very proud of that position. As for Cassie, her existence has taken a more obedient and peculiar path. The focus given to her in this stage highlights her more condescending side. By showing her living in a pet house with a very malleable attitude, she has found her niche in the digital world, becoming a celebrity in her own way. It is a profession that generates controversy but serves to cover her debts. That afternoon, Nate returns from his workday and comes across a surreal image. His wife is acting like a puppy while the employee records the scene, all while the kitchen is filled with dirty dishes giving off an unpleasant aroma. After dealing with the employee, Nate tries to make Cassie understand the danger of her actions and how it would destroy their reputations if any company executive saw those videos. He complains that he works his hardest doing real business to pay for the house, while she wastes time pretending to be a creature on the internet. Cassie argues that she just wants her follower community to grow, and that, although she isn't making money from it yet, she feels she is about to. In her view, when that happens, money will no longer be a problem. Ignoring the common sense Nate tries to impose, Cassie seems to have abandoned all logic. Nonetheless, she is so deep in character that she begins to obey the orders he dictates. Given this scenario, Nate decides to take advantage of the moment to have a different kind of intimate encounter, and allows her to continue her game, knowing he only has an hour before returning to his tasks. Since his father ended up in prison, Nate took the reins of the construction company, but his inexperience is causing the company to sink. Meanwhile, Cassie lives in her fantasy world, watching as her wedding budget keeps rising. She dreams big, without realizing that Nate is in financial ruin. The blueprints he had in his office had nothing to do with the regrettable situation of the actual construction site. That afternoon, a banker went to supervise the progress of the work. Nate urgently needs the funds for the second phase to be approved, and although he leaves much to be desired as a builder, he is a top-tier liar, which serves him well in this moment of crisis. While he shamelessly deceives the banker, Cassie reflects at home on her goals. She aspires to more. She wants to shop without looking at price tags and is seriously considering opening an OnlyFans channel. Her plan is to sell exclusive photographs with personal messages for $50. With that, she plans to finance her wedding and avoid misery. But she is very clear that Nate must not know under any circumstances. Back with Rue, Lexi tells her that Maddie is now dedicated to representing influencers and some actors, highlighting Dylan, the heartthrob of the moment. Lexi confesses that his mere presence makes her tremble with excitement. During a recording, Lexi noticed a key detail that not only helped the scene but gave Dylan more screen time. For this, her boss congratulated her, and the actor, before leaving, called her by a name similar to hers. Following that creative contribution, her superior began to trust her judgment much more. On the other hand, Maddie's routine consists of following Dylan everywhere and organizing his dates. Her boss was a very tough but successful woman who kept 10% of Dylan's earnings. That was about $50,000 a week, though Maddie was barely given $800. She lived in a modest basement while dreaming of having her own piece of the business one day. That night, while Rue had dinner with Ali, she also told him about the Christian family from Texas. She couldn't stop thinking about the peace they radiated. Ali suggested that perhaps she should give the Bible a chance, hinting that she might find the tranquility she seeks there. Since Rue doesn't have time to sit down and read, she opted for an audiobook to listen to while working her Uber shifts. On her night shifts, she barely earned enough for the basics, as the massive debt to Lori prevented her from touching the money from her drug deliveries. That early morning, while carrying a very large passenger, she received a notice from Wayne for a new assignment. The next morning, Rue went to her boss's stable where they hide a secret laboratory. There, the team manufactured the merchandise without rest. Wayne told her she had to take a package to a high-profile client and warned her that this time there could be no failures. Shortly after, he handed her a bag full of tablets. Rue set off toward a luxury mansion on the outskirts, a place for millionaires where a strange guy was waiting for her in the garage. As soon as the car entered, the door closed behind her, making the atmosphere very tense. The subject demanded the bag immediately. Rue complied, but asked for permission to use the bathroom. Before letting her into the house, the man dryly warned her not to touch anything unnecessary in the bathroom. Entering the mansion, Rue encounters a crowd of women in the middle of a wild party. But in the basement, there are weapons and money everywhere, including the payment for her delivery. Looking for the bathroom, she gets lost and ends up helping a girl. When the guard sees that Rue is taking too long, he goes looking for her. He finds her helping a young woman with her bikini, but shortly after, he sees her getting high and dancing with the other girls in the living room, something that bothers him greatly. Bishop stands watching her for a while as she dances in a trance until he loses his temper, grabs her by the arm, and kicks her out. At that moment, the boss appears and asks who she is. Bishop clarifies that she comes on behalf of Lori. Alamo, the boss, scolds her for her lack of manners in starting to party in someone else's home. However, he ends up giving her a drink and tells her about his vision. To him, women are his best source of income, and he has an army of them generating fortunes for him. Alamo owns the most exclusive and shady spots in the city, and Rue, desperate, implores him to give her a job. She feels she must change her life and start making a lot of money so as not to end up badly in the desert. Meanwhile, Cassie spies on Maddie's profile, who always appears with famous people. But that digital fame does not translate into real money. That night, Cassie prepares a romantic dinner for Nate with many candles to talk about the wedding. When she tells him she wants to spend $50,000 just on floral arrangements, Nate cannot believe it. He tells her it's crazy to pay that for something that dies in 3 days. He sets a limit of $5,000, forcing her to cut expenses while he focuses on his business with the city council. That's when Cassie proposes paying for the flowers herself if he covers the rest, and she drops the news about OnlyFans. Nate's reaction is insulting. He asks if she is going to prostitute herself for some flowers. He mocks her and forbids her from embarrassing him like that. But Cassie stands her ground. She doesn't plan to live in poverty or have a tacky wedding because he has no money. She clarifies that she wasn't asking for permission, just informing him. Nate stays silent until she suggests that perhaps they shouldn't get married if they aren't compatible. He throws in her face everything he does to maintain the house. But Cassie reminds him that she hates that place and that he never fulfilled his promises of renovation. She gives him an ultimatum. Either he pays for everything or the relationship is over. Nate, cornered, asks what kind of photos she plans to upload. She shows him her charms and manages to convince him. But he sets a sacred condition. If she shows her body, she cannot show her face. He knows that if she is discovered, his reputation and his company would be finished. Suddenly, the scene changes to a girl suffering an overdose on the floor. Bishop orders an analysis of the drugs Rue brought, and they discover it contains fentanyl. It is a catastrophe, and Rue has to give explanations for the death of Alamo's employee. The boss is furious because that girl made him a lot of money. He demands to know if it is a sabotage by Lori. Rue, scared to death, explains that she only transports, she doesn't package. Between tears and with guns pointed at her, she confesses everything to Alamo. Her addiction, her mother throwing away the drugs, and her current slavery. She tells him that perhaps it was God who put her in his path to give her another chance. Alamo decides to put her to the test. Shortly after, Rue is in the field with an apple on her head. Alamo prepares his pistol and orders her not to move. Bishop tells her to close her eyes and pray. Alamo fires and perfectly shatters the apple. Rue begins to laugh out of pure shock and kneels to give thanks. The episode ends with that laugh of madness from Rue as a new door opens in her dark business.